Yo, how's it going, you guys? It's Marcus Scraper. In this update, we'll talk about the S&P 500, Tesla stock, Palantir stock, and we'll talk about my Pinterest trade. Yeah, don't want to talk about that, but we'll talk about my Pinterest trade too. Okay, so back to the S&P 500 over here. We can see that we talked about this area of resistance that we expected to run into, and we also talked about basically that we think this would be an area that we run into. We don't think we're just going to blast through this like we've been blasting through all of the areas of resistance so far. And we drew this squiggly line right here as a potential path that we might go. Now, looking at some historical analysis right over here of some areas that when we hit resistance, like this run right here, what happened when we hit resistance? Well, we kind of just traded alongside, basically under the resistance area, but right alongside of it. So that tells me, just in terms of it's kind of common where you don't just have this complete rejection and go all the way back down to where we'd find support necessarily. So we could just see something like this and then before going to the upside. And that can happen sooner, obviously, but basically, maybe we don't have as deep of a correction. Definitely possible, but this is just another scenario that I want to point out here that we might just go back up and trade against us similar to this period right over here. So that's kind of one thing that I'm looking at. And then yeah, then we could break out to the downside too. If we are looking at this where we broke to the downside after all those rejections before going back to the upside. So this is something just to pay attention to. That's something that's just interesting. Another alternative scenario, but we are finding resistance on this trend line that we drew here. Let's look at Tesla stock real quick. So Tesla stock here, we talked about this area of resistance here, and we also talked about that we think that we're going to go to 1,000. And so we definitely got to 1,000. And the interesting thing here is that we had these two lines of resistance here that we drew from a long time ago. We just had these on the board ever since back over here. Some of these even longer. So an interesting thing here is that, well, where did we gap up the next day? We gapped up right on this area of resistance, and to get through this area we just gapped up over both of these trends. So that's just pretty interesting in terms of if we're following these lines that we think are significant. It's interesting how price hops over, or how it has a hard time to get over these type of things. Now we're seeing 1,000 as support. Will this gap be filled? Okay, well, let's take a look at Tesla. Tesla does like to fill gaps, but let's look at similar runs and see how often these gaps get filled actually, especially breaking out, let's say, breaking out of all-time highs, right? So let's take a look over here. This was a breakout of all-time highs over here. Did we have any gaps over here? We had a gap down here. Absolutely had a gap right over here. This is not the same as what we're experiencing necessarily, because that would be more like making a gap over here. Did we create a gap up here too? Let's take a look. The highs here were 526 and the lows here 526.20. Okay, super cool. Okay, so we have a gap right here after breaking essentially the all-time highs from back over here. And this is okay, so this is similar. After a long period of consolidation, finally breaking out, right? Long period of consolidation, finally breaking out, just like what we're doing over there. So did we fill this gap? What is the price over here? We said 526. That's what we said. That is exactly what we said. So did we fill that? Let's see. Let's look at the low over here. The lows here is 546. And the low over here is 539. We did not fill that. Okay, let's take a look at the last time before that where we broke out for all-time high prices to see again if there's a trend that we're seeing here. Okay, right here. Broke out. We have a gap down here. That is, similar to the gap over here. Not the same here, but then we had a high here. Did we have a gap? We did not have a gap, it looks like. Maybe we had a gap here. Let's take a look. We had a high of 333.76, a low. Okay, so we did have a gap here as well. That's a little bit similar. We did fill that gap there. Okay, interesting. And thing to note here, we didn't have that long of a period of consolidation. We did have a longer period of consolidation over here, arguably more similar to the period of consolidation over here. Let's do this one more time. just to see if we can see any trends. Okay, next over here. After a long period of consolidation down here, let's see about the highs over here when we broke out from over here. Okay, let's see right here. Right here. This is a good example here. Breaking out of the previous highs, essentially. Did we fill that gap again? Let's take a look, shall we? We did not. Okay, so in terms of the recent history, obviously we can go further back in Tesla's history and find some other things, but because the logical thing, my bias would be initially, yes, this gap will be filled. That's my logical, you know, without having to think type of thing. But looking at history, based on a few things that we're finding here of what Tesla likes to do before breaking out, it's unlikely to be filled in the past. So this is making me think that will this be filled soon? I think this will not be filled soon. I have the bias that this will not be filled soon based on the historical analysis. If I were to talk about this before looking at these things, I would have just said, yes, I think this would be filled. But because of that, I think this won't be filled so soon. Can this be filled in the future at some point after we do whatever we're trying to do? Absolutely. Whenever there's a market correction at some point in the future, I think the next area of resistance is going to be this trend line up here. I think we will probably hit this trend line at some point. That's something that first of all, let's find out what is this trend line here that I drew here anyway. Is this something that we think that's actually going to get hit? It's this this OG line here that we had there. Okay, so will that be hit at some point? Well, I think that this could be hit. I'm not sure if that's the most significant area, but I'm gonna be keeping an eye on this trend line here and see if that's an area where we actually get rejected. But besides that, basically what I'm trying to say is keep an open mind based on historical analysis that Tesla might not fill this gap so soon. What I'm just trying to say is that we could see something like this, and then maybe after that we fill the gap by hitting this area of resistance down here at some point, maybe filling the gap. Who knows what's going to happen? No one knows what's going to happen with price action, but this is just interesting because I think most people would be bearish to think that this gap would be filled, and that might just be a mistake based on some historical analysis. So we'll see how this plays out, but pretty interesting stuff that we just found here. Okay, let's take a look at Palantir. It's been a while since we talked about Palantir, but there's nothing too much to talk about with Palantir. In our last update, if you follow me, the last update we talked about, we've always just been saying that we think that this downtrend will was reversed here, and we have been expecting ever since we broke out here. We just said that we expect a similar thing in reverse. And the last thing we talked about was, well, this last time we tried to break out, we still think maybe we have one more little correction, not necessarily all the way to the downside before taking off. That's what we think is going to happen. That's our bias. We still haven't changed our opinion of that. In terms of the day-to-day price action here, we did break down below this moving average right over here. So that is a little bit discouraging, but this could be a fake out to the upside. We'll see what happens. There's been some super bullish news about crypto with Palantir. So I would expect that still bullish on this. Again, as long as we don't make a lower low here, this pattern, in my opinion, of this going like this is just still intact. I did, however, yesterday, I did sell some, was it yesterday? I believe it was yesterday. I sold some, yes, I did. Yesterday, I sold some of my call options yesterday for Palantir. So I only have about, I think it's like 6 or 7K left of Palantir options, which is just 15 options I have left for a May strike price in the future. Because, like you guys know, I've been buying options down here, bought options over here, and I've been buying options on this as well. And this has been just working out phenomenally. And it just seems like a super safe and easy trade. Talk about safe and easy trades. Let's talk about this trade right here, Palantir. Not Palantir, Pinterest. How did this trade go? Well, clearly this trade went horribly wrong. And I ended up selling out of this trade, taking a significant loss here. And we have to talk about, again, like clearly Palantir and Tesla, have been doing phenomenally for me in terms of the longs I have, and then also the option swings I've been doing with Palantir have been phenomenal. But Pinterest, and I talked about my last update that I mean, the first time I talked about the stock was on last week. I said that I don't think that we're gonna get negative news coming out anytime really soon. For that and for closing on Friday of last week. I talked about this week in my update, saying that I'm deciding to hold it and throw out some more covered calls. But I did say that since as time goes on, it increases the risk of news. And I said if any news comes out, it would be negative. And so I don't want to hear any news come out about this stock. And well, we had news come out about this stock, and that just completely crashed this stock. And so the news came out that changed my hypothesis thesis, went against everything about my trade. I sold out. I ended up taking a significant loss. We're talking about maybe around $1,000 in losses here. So, but it is what it is, and my portfolio right now is near all-time highs, just totally crushing it. So I can't win all my trades. Pinterest clearly was a losing trade, and I want to talk about and be transparent about my winning trades, my losing trades, and Pinterest. Well, I closed out of it, and it was absolutely a loser. I hope you guys got some value from this content. If you haven't already, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll catch you guys in the next one.